contract extension, no new money involved. Good. Okay, we'll move that item. And then what I'd like to do on, because it's probably the longest discussion, is hold number 2 to last, and then we can go to the next item.
Boy, you big guy.
Fine, how you doing?
Mr. Grant. 1 and 3. Nobody recognized me until the last day. Aren't you Bill Rose? So good.
Okay, that should take us to item 3, which is the CAO report relative to the 2009-10 first construction project report. ITGS, or I'm sorry, Information Technology and Governmental Affairs Committee on November 17th recommended approval.
Let me ask, is Mr. Rezor planning to be here?
Yes, he's planning to be here, but
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. The reason I didn't want to do that on consent, 2 things I was going to ask if we can clarify in the committee report, because I think it's pretty self-explanatory as to the document, is that if we could get information to the clerk as to what actually is going to happen to that $100,000 artwork that is not going to be at Hollenbeck Station,
Yeah.
that we've expended the money, the artwork has been completed, but it's not going to be used. Do we know what they're going to do with that, now that they're asking to be refunded?
That's a very good question. We have Ramon Soto from our office here to respond to that.
Ramon Soto with the CIO's office here. Actually, our understanding is the work was contracted by Cultural Affairs, so Cultural Affairs would get possession of it, and it would end up in storage essentially until such time as it's deemed appropriate to.
Is it that offensive? I mean, because I didn't understand what the conflict was.
I would say that Mr. Weezar would probably be able to explain his concerns more directly, but it was of concern to his office and the community, and so as a result, it was taken down.
But the issue is we reimburse the money, the artwork goes to Cultural Affairs to be put in storage.
Essentially, yes.
Okay, if we can make sure that's in the committee report. The other one is item, and I was asking whether you...
I want to know what it is before we put it anywhere. How about that? It's costing the city money.
Yes, it is.
We have a photograph or something, do we have it, council?
We could ask Cultural Affairs to provide you a photograph if you would like.
How much did it cost?
$176,000.
Taxpayers' money?
It was originally, yes, it was. It was originally Prop Q funds. And Prop Q officially cannot lose money, so if this is Prop Q funds were expended, the report calls for the repayment of this with general fund money. It's CIEP funds.
Who did all this process? How many years ago was this? I'm
It
curious.
probably goes back about 2 or 3 years. GSD, I'm sorry, it's easy to blame GSD for everything, isn't it? Cultural Affairs contracted for the work, but of course, working with the police department. At some point, the police department would have approved it. And presumably, they should also work with the council office. Whether they actually work with the council office, I don't know. Bottom line is when the artwork was actually put up there, it did not appeal to certain people, and they appealed to the powers that be to take it down.
Okay, well, you're being cryptic. What was the artwork? I have no idea what we're talking about.
You know what? It's a new assignment for me as well, so I apologize. I don't know exactly what it was, other than it was of concern to some people. You might want to just put this on the table for Mr. Weezar to arrive if he's going to, and he could probably better explain his concerns.
Why don't we hold it until he comes here, or until the meeting's over?
Okay.
All right, let's do that. Let's go to the next item.
Okay, that takes us to item 4, which is a motion, Park Smith, relative to the request that the city attorney report on the status of the city's liability claims payments and what measures have been put in place to reduce the city's liability claims payouts. And an instruction that all city departments report to this committee in conjunction with the 2009-10 budget hearings as to what measures they have taken to correct conditions which have led to the liability claims being filed against them.
Don't.
Okay. Let me just ask, Ray, do we have any sense, since we went through the budget hearing and heard from particularly the top 7 or 8 departments, as to what progress they've made so far in implementing strategies as relates to liability?
As far as the individual departments, no, I'm not aware of basically where they are in some of those actions in the respective departments. I do know we've been working with the city attorney's office and trying to collect some data and also have data broken out by various departments as to their claims and what has happened. One of the notes that I will say that our office over the past year has been working with the mayor's PMU unit to come put together some, with us doing most of the heavy lifting here. I'm looking at what was determined some universal metrics, and this was one of them. We had originally put together a couple reports showing where departments were, whether they were on par, up, down, et cetera. We're working to try to refine some of that data, but at this point, the Risk Management Office has been working with city attorney to develop a better system of tracking some of the data.
Let me ask, when do you think we would have sufficient information to have a report for our progress in this fiscal year?
Yes, Paul will come up and find out. He's got a more recent report.
Good afternoon. Paul Rella, CEO Risk Management. I'm sorry, sir, what was
I
your
was just
question
wondering,
again?
what would be a reasonable date that we could expect a written report back on the progress the departments have made during this fiscal year?
During this current fiscal year, to be quite honest, as Ray had said, we're not quite sure where they are in terms of their progress, but we do work with them on a daily basis. We provide the information that we receive from the city attorney's office into our cost of risk reports that we've put together for each of those 7 departments that were mentioned, the highest liability departments. We have not talked to them about reports per se. It's rather an ongoing dialogue about where their liabilities lie and any assistance that they need with those efforts.
Let me ask this. We will be in the middle of budget somewhere around April. Okay. Let me ask that in March, if we could ask for you to come back and give us an update in March 2010, so we'll be able to digest that information before we get into next year's budgetary process, and we'll know what progress has been made, what are the issues we need to emphasize. And so we'd ask that the CAO, with the assistance of the City Attorney's CLA, prepare a written report to the Budget and Finance Committee in March 2010 prior to the budget deliberations, describing the implementation of liability programs and initiatives discussed during the 09-10 budget hearings. I'd like to know their impact, the corrective actions, measures of effectiveness, and our concentration should be on the top 7 departments that represent about 90% of the cost risk. But we can ask for that in March before we get into the budget, then we know who and how we can address it during the budget process.
Okay.
We'd approve that this motion on number 4 with that direction.
Terrific.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, that should take us to item 5, which is the CEO report relative to the administration of overtime. As you know, we had discussion last week on overtime and how it relates, basically the freezing of the overtime in our FSR, our financial status report. We had that recommendation to freeze all overtime cash payments in departments. We heard what I'll call the cries and the pleas by various departments on their respective operations and how freezing cash overtime in those created other problems in those departments. And so a staff actually drafted a memo to all city departments laying out some of the overtime criteria. The memo sort of lays out, first of all, the necessity, stepping back to the necessity on working overtime. It needs to be, critical work, for department's operations. Needs to be reviewed by management to make sure that it is essential. Overtime needs to be assigned to the lowest level staff, things of that sort that lay out just overall overtime parameters. We then touch on where we would authorize cash overtime. And there's 3 general areas. It is basically special funded type activities, 100% fiscal funded. We'd continue the use of CAS overtime. Grant, where there's grant funds, we get 100% reimbursement. We would authorize that. And then also where there is 100% proprietary reimbursement to departments. And those would be the three areas where CAS overtime would be recommended. As far as the general fund, there are two other areas that we would recommend. Number one, where we have fixed post position. This is primarily in DSD for the security operations. And then we also, for certain very narrow parameters regarding the use, where there's a nightly meeting. And this came up really with planning. Basically, all of the area planning commissions in the held right now, they meet on a nightly basis, and planning has difficulty in trying to get all those, basically staffing those commissions.
Okay. Let me just say that and I think I appreciate the clarity, as there was some concerns mentioned at the last meeting. But I would just ask, as we go forward, that on page 1, we have the necessity to work overtime. I would have liked to have seen a sentence in there that talks about the issue that the only overtime that should be used is when funds are available in the operating budget, because what we find is that departments overspend and then they hand you the bill come June and you fix it for them. But we need to add something that says that they can't spend money that's not in their operational budget at the time of approval, and that the specific overtime does not create a budget shortfall. We need to address that issue when it talks about under page 1, necessity to work overtime. And then on page 2, where we talk about proprietary departments, item number 3, it would appear that we should be able to recover those funds in the fiscal year they're spent, as opposed to where we may be at some disadvantage when we're dealing with grants. But that should be a priority for number 3, that when we're dealing with those funds from proprietary departments, that should be they should be paid back or paid during the year, the fiscal year that those services are provided. And then on number 6, under the grant uses, that we just establish an ongoing priority for reimbursement to be paid during the fiscal year of usage. So those are 3 things that I'd ask if we can find a way to emphasize.
And I was going to say this, the one thing is that we want them, basically departments, for them to expend, there has to be money available. They have to stay within their budget or available funding. I mean,
That's a big issue, because
Yes.
you know they'll give you the bill in June, that they can't make payroll, so.
Yeah, I was going to actually expand upon that, and that is the problem, that there's no accountability, that a general manager A does a good job, doesn't mess up, and general manager B messes up, they blow their budget. We end up finding a way to fund it somehow because it's already done. So I think there needs to be more accountability. We shouldn't just say it's got to be money available in the general fund, but say to the mayor that, number 1, the mayor has the ability to give a pay raise to general managers within a range, I think it's 3%, 5%, 7%, something like that, that any general manager that exceeds their overtime budget on those non-authorized, or certain things that we are exempt, that they cannot get a raise in that year. And secondly, if they do it a second year, or let's say they do it more than by 10%, a really big amount, that we also have the right to lower their salaries, which the mayor does have the ability to do. And so I'd like to see some language in there to really bring accountability to our general manager.
I'll second that.
Thank you. And so if you can bring back some ideas and language on what the options are to do that, I think it's about time that the 40 or however many left general managers of the city bear the responsibility for messing their budgets up. Because up until this time, they get out of jail free card every time they do it. So we need to get tough, I think.
In fact, I think we talked at one of our budget hearings that even the thought of, if you go over budget, that it affects your next year's budget,
Carry over the loss.
carry over the loss, that you just don't get a waiver at the end of the year and then we start you new. But we got to do something in the sense of that June reserve fund impact is significant for us.
I agree. We'll be happy to work with the mayor's office on what's really the merit pay and how that works, yes.
Yeah, if I could ask Mr. Smith this, would you also include LAPD and fire department?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with the exempted instances. One, certainly anything that's a reimbursement from a major event doesn't go back to the department. That's a motion I actually have in, say, you may have a major fire or a riot or whatever, they expend exorbitant amounts of money on overtime, and that money is not reimbursed to the department.
Right.
So that can really mess them up, and particularly with constant staffing, the fire departments becomes very problematic. So I think with police and fire, we have to kind of look at it. There are two biggest problems, obviously, but we have to look at what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed. So there'd be on-budget, off-budget differentiation in their overtime accounts, I think, would be what we need.
And we could get that on a regular basis, enough to appreciate it, so we could act on it?
That would be helpful. The other area that we have to be cognizant of is basically where we have underfunded a department to begin with, and we've done better with PD and fire, but there are still a few departments where we have not given them probably what they would normally expend, and so that's something we need to take into account as well as we look at overtime and their usage.
But I think one of the things we've debated in here a long time is that underfunded is in the eye of the beholder. It's the budget is the budget. I mean, and so we've had departments come in and...
Not advisory.
Yeah, not advisory, that's right. But we have people come in and say, it's just not enough, and you say, well, it's all we have. And so I think we got to be able to walk through that and decipher if it's a fire and it goes beyond their resources, that's one thing. But if you just overspend and say, punch my ticket at the end of the year, that's not what's acceptable. Or just saying it wasn't enough and so we just kept spending, that's not acceptable either.
And I would agree, but there are still a few departments, and our Office of Finance is one of them that comes to mind, where we still, they usually expend quite a bit of overtime, especially during the renewal season, but several years ago, we would draw upon salary savings to help them balance. Well, over the last several years, they've been basically exceeding their salary count, so we've had to basically give them additional appropriations. That's one example where we still have a department, we haven't been appropriately budgeting them. Now, we've tried, but obviously this past year, there wasn't really funds available.
Yeah, but that's one of those departments, being that they bring in, what, 400 million? That we should give them a budget and make them stay within it. I mean,
I would agree.
Yeah, and that way you would say, if there's money that comes to us no matter how they perform. People pay their bills, but there's money they actually dig for, that they have to show the initiative. If we parceled off a piece of that dig for money, and that they know that's their only budget, and we don't restrain them on the issue of hiring and replacement, then you can basically fund them and get them off the general fund, and they live within their means. But if we put them under the managed hiring and then make it more difficult for them to be successful, then we keep coming up with having to fulfill their needs at the end of the year. But we should be able to figure out some formula as to what money they actually dig for and money they actually bring in by their own resources. And we can always go a year or two earlier and say, this is the baseline, and say, here's your budget, and you then can move people around and spend money, but you're not going to get a dime more than that. And I think that's would get them off of our general fund. Every time we look up, we're trying to decide whether it's a revenue position or a non-revenue position, and we spend a lot of energy debating that when we should just give them a lump of money and say, go collect money. You know? So that's a summer study.
I appreciate what he said. Transportation Committee, which DOT, it's really big, a deal about the workers being able to collect that money meter and to do the parking things and all that. Anybody that not only pays for their own salary but brings general revenue into the city, we got to look twice at. That's all. Can't get rid of it.
We can do it by department basis and
Yep.
make a recommendation
Yep.
of the mayor or whatever.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move item 5 with those comments, just a matter of emphasis on issues, because I'm just concerned that every time we talk about overtime, we got to remind people it's only if you have it in your budget, and that you can't create a budget shortfall under the circumstances. And then for proprietary departments, I don't know if we need to alter the language or send them another document and say if they're going to use these services, they need to pay in the year they're being used, because they create a cash flow for us otherwise.
Most of the work that's done for proprietaries, it's just sort of an ongoing, and so we bill and we get receipts. I mean, is usually some carryover as we get receipts. If we bill something later this year, we may get in July, but likewise, we may have billed something last, May or June, and we receive something in July. So most of that stuff is ongoing, but.
Yeah. But I think on the positions for proprietary, they know at July 1st, they're going to get X number of city attorneys. Those things shouldn't be a mystery that we need to get paid during that year. There may be some additional issues that delay, but I would think they would have a better pay record than the grants.
Yes, and they do. Basically, the proprietors are fairly good about paying their bill, and they're fairly consistent. As long as we're not talking about LAPD and some other special services, proprietors usually very good about paying our bills. So.
Very good. So we'll move that with those directions. Why don't we go to number, is it 2?
2. Item 2 is a motion, Parks LeBon's Garcetti and Parks LeBon's and CLA report relative to review analysis of proposed agreements for the City of Los Angeles to become a host city for the 2018 or 2022 Federation International Football Association.
Before we get started, why don't we ask Pat Lynch to come up and make a comment from the Coliseum General Manager, and then we can get into your report.
Thank you, Pat Lynch, General Manager of the Coliseum. This bid has been out there for a while, and the folks from the U.S. Soccer Association who submit the bid on behalf of the United States did site visits with us in October, early October. And at that time, we being myself, and the correspondence has been going through the mayor's office originally. That's where it comes from, and then it's disseminated to myself, as well as David Simon has been working with us from the Sports Council. When they talked about the host city agreements at that time, we indicated that due to the nature of what's been happening in the city of Los Angeles with budgetary issues and such, that would probably be a difficult, if not impossible, task for us to tackle. They indicated to us that it was a necessity, that it wasn't an option, unfortunately, and it's because FIFA, the governing board of soccer, has, I believe there's 10 countries that are the finalists for these bids, and out of the 10 countries, each country is going to have around 30 cities within that country vying as well for the games. So to be doing 10 countries times 25 agreements, they said, we can't. But there's another issue here, another piece here that you should pay attention to, and that's that once the bid is awarded, and if your city is lucky enough to be chosen, you have another, quote, bite at the apple, and that's the fact that we have to then sign a contract to use the stadium. So the fallback for cities is that until an agreement with the stadium is executed, the city can want to have the games all they want to, but unless they have a stadium to play in, they're kind of out of luck. So that was told to us directly by the representatives of the U.S. Soccer Association, which is, once again, the group submitting the bids. So this has been in play for a while. We were not believing that other cities would sign the agreements. We've since been told that they have, and that it's a necessity to be part of the bid package that we sign these host city agreements. From the Coliseum's perspective, we would have no intention of signing a stadium agreement unless everybody was on board. Being an entity controlled by representatives of the city, county, and state, we certainly wouldn't do anything against the wishes of any of our parents. So, we stand ready to back up the city and whatever needs to be done down the road.
Ted, let me ask, are we applying for a host of games, or the finals, or the playoff? I mean, what are we applying for?
Yeah, that's determined by FIFA and the United States Soccer Association, and that'll be way down the road. What's going to happen is procedurally, I believe there's 26 27 cities right now that have been identified. They're going to pare it down to 18, and then the 18 are then submitted to FIFA. Down the road, FIFA will then sit with the U.S. Soccer Association to whittle that number down even more, and then determine where the games will be. As folks might remember, we very, very, very successfully hosted the 1994 games here, and that is still the high watermark for all World Cup games. It made the most money, had the most attendance. They don't forget that. So we stand an outstanding chance of repeating all that. But it won't be, more than likely, the talk in the soccer world is that England is next up for 2018, and we would be the most likely for 2022. That's the other piece of just common information that's out there.
And timing-wise, when does this process have to be completed?
The final award, November 30th is when the host city agreements were supposed to be done. We've been given some leeway on that. On December 11th, the U.S. Bid Committee will submit the bidding agreements to FIFA. In December of this year, in January of 2010, the U.S. will whittle our list down to the 18 sites. That will be done independent. That'll be done by the U.S. Soccer Association, by the bid committee.
So the leeway you're saying is what, between now and December 10th or 18th?
December 11th.
December 11th.
December 11th is when the U.S. submits their bids to FIFA.
All right.
And the city agreements in May 14th of 2000, actually that's a bad date. In December of 2010, FIFA will announce who won. So there's still time, but the U.S. has to get their bid in
2010?
in December 11 of 2009.
Okay, so a year from now we'll know.
A year from now, we'll know.
Right. Okay. Any other questions?
Can we get our bid in by the night?
That-
The bid's ready to go. Well, the council, your action would be,
Yeah, you're going to give us, it
Yes.
seems like a no-brainer to me. Go ahead.
Any
This
questions?
is upfront money.
Yeah,
Any
Well, it is,
questions to Pat before Jerry gets started?
I have questions about the agreement. You want to wait till you're done?
Sure. Okay. Well, clearly we are talking about the World Cup, and arguably next to the Olympics, it's the most prestigious sporting event in the world, and estimates are that it would bring in anywhere from 400 to 600 million in economic activity for each host city. So certainly, and Los Angeles is clearly the soccer capital of the United States. And I can't imagine, quite frankly, the USA submitting a bid without Los Angeles being a participant. That being said, this agreement was presented to Mr. Parks a week ago Thursday, and we've had 3 working days, in order to look at this agreement and determine what it says and doesn't say. And I will have to tell you that the agreement is very poorly written. There's a whole lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of issues that are not defined in the agreement, and while again I can't imagine the city not participating, I think we're going to have to go forward with our eyes open and work very closely on the stadium agreement, and work very closely on the agreement with the local organizing committee, which will also have to be set up to make sure that a lot of these things are much better defined, and we clearly know what it is we're facing. We did go through, I think there are a few really significant concerns that I want to call out to you. And again, unfortunately, we're not able to release our report until just before the meeting, but it is before you. And beginning on page 4, the city is going to have to indemnify FIFA's corporate sponsors and affiliates, et cetera, of any liability, including any liability caused by their negligence. Now, I don't recall that the city's ever agreed to do something quite like that before. That being said, we host big events all of the time. We have crowd control, we have traffic control, we have policing, et cetera. It's not as if we don't know how to do this. But again, it's a very broad indemnification. Anything obviously occurring in the Coliseum is something we're going to have to work with the Coliseum about and make sure that they're carrying sufficient liability insurance and other things if this goes forward to make sure that the city is protected. But again, it's a very, very broad provision that is a concern. The city at its own cost is going to be required to actively promote the event. Now, we don't really know what that means. City representatives are going to have to participate. We're going to have to work with the LOC and FIFA in staging events. It can be concerts. It can be a whole host of things that would also, as I understand, require live showing of all of the matches in all the host cities. So we would have to have a venue that would accommodate people that were watching matches not being held in the Coliseum. And that would have to be free of charge to the majority of the attendees. On the other hand, the FamFest can generate significant revenue, and that revenue does go to the local entity. So there is some control there on identifying the venues and working with the local the LOC in submitting the venues for the FanFest. There's a provision that local taxes would have to be waived for FIFA and for the LOC. It's unclear what that means. It's unlikely, we believe, the city attorney can perhaps address this more, but the LOC is certainly going to be a nonprofit, and we believe that FIFA is, so they're not subject to city business tax. Issues, however, of the hotel tax. Are we going to be required to refund hotel tax for not the attendees at the event, but FIFA members and the people who are working on organizing the event and staying within the city? Quite frankly, we don't know. That's very unclear. I think those are some of the we're agreeing to provide police and fire services and transportation services. Again, that's not unusual for us. We know how to do this, but we could not seek reimbursement for those costs. So the economic impact, the jobs creation, which is substantial, I think that we would have to accept that those benefits are going to offset costs. So in essence, I think those are the issues of main concern. The fact of the matter is that this is a take it or leave it agreement. We received today information that Boston, Oakland, Phoenix, Indianapolis, San Diego, Kansas City, Nashville, Miami, Baltimore, and St. Louis have signed or have approved signing the agreement. New York and Washington are supposed to, as I understand it, sometime this week. So unfortunately, the city's in a position of we can approve the agreement or not, but we are not in a position of having leverage to try to renegotiate.
What's the timing between our submission and where you really will have a real stadium agreement? What's the
We have no specific requirement on the stadium agreement, but we would suspect it would be sometime next summer.
Okay, so that gives us 6 months or 8 months to figure out some of this stuff before we get to the point of the stadium agreement.
It does, yes.
A couple questions. On the TV, I noticed in there that we're required to have television broadcast. Do we have the right then to sell the TV rights and keep the revenue, or we arrange it and they get the money?
We arrange it and FIFA gets the money.
FIFA gets the money.
Right. Again, the broadcast rights would be FIFA's. It would be free of charge. Now, there may be some opportunity for merchandising. There may be opportunity. There would be opportunities for other related FanFest events that we could keep. We'd have to work in FIFA in developing that, but they would get the broadcast rights.
So on the FanFest, it says they have their own sponsors. Will we be able to bring in additional sponsors like during the LA Olympics where we were highly successful in selling sponsorships?
As long as they're not competing,
Right.
Yeah, and as we indicate in the report, if we're successful, it's going to be very important to establish the kind of committee that we had in the Olympics that really did an incredible job of raising money and offsetting the costs.
But for their sponsors that come in, do we get any percentage of revenue off of that? They keep all that, I presume, huh?
They keep all of
They
it.
keep all of it. And I guess from what you said, you couldn't have a ticket tax then to pay for any of the costs related to putting it on. So if you said waive all taxes and fees?
For FIFA and FIFA members, theoretically, I suppose it would be possible to have a ticket tax, although we'd have to look at whether or not that would be a 218 issue. because we don't have, a regular 218 general fund.
I don't think we'd have a 218 issue if it was coming here and asking the voters to give us that tax, but that's something for the future. But
Yeah.
do we have the ability even to do that, or is that what they're talking about when they say you have to waive local taxes? Well, really, the question is, do they set the ticket price and they get the money?
Yes.
Yes.
So if we wanted any cost recovery in a way of a ticket tax, which that happens a lot, is that an open venue or not?
Well, the likelihood is not, but they do have to get the money. But the taxes that we waived, as we read it and as we understand it, relate to the organization itself, not attendees.
Mm-hmm.
But they do set the ticket price and they do get the price for the tickets. So that technically, I would suppose, wouldn't be prohibited, but it's not something that we could do without their consent.
So if we have to ask, and the same would be then if we wanted to raise the TOT for the event or something.
That I would assert they would have nothing to do with, but that clearly is a 218 issue.
218 issue, yeah.
What about parking?
800 spaces would have to be provided for free. I'm assuming that would be accommodated at the Coliseum.
Oh, darn.
We would clearly not get any parking tax from that.
But, I mean, do we have the ability, if they're beyond the 800?
Yes, again, those would, the 800 would be, for
Our revenue.
for FIFA, for, the organizers, the, guests, that sort of thing. So we would certainly be free to collect the ticket tax from attendees, yes.
Well, I think Mr. Parks earlier said that we got until June or July to really work this out.
No.
No. This agreement really would be binding. I think there are things that can be clarified with the stadium agreement, and if the Coliseum Commission is not able to reach agreement with FIFA, then everything falls apart.
Now, did you do any research with these other cities that have already submitted it?
We attempted, yes.
We had a bid meeting in New York City 2 weeks ago, where all the city representatives were there, and everybody had the same concerns, but once again, it was a take it or leave it situation, so most of them took it with the understanding that there's another bite at the apple, is the words they kept using down the road when you do the stadium agreements. Everybody had the same concerns. I mean, the document is identical for virtually all of us, so everybody's got serious concerns over the liability issues, et cetera, but that's the way it is.
Dave, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I just remember in the '84 Olympics, we signed some pre-agreements that we really reneged on and went back to the IOC and said, no, this is the way we're going to do it, and they were not happy, but they did it. It since became the model that everybody uses, but we've done that before, so.
Well, in the final analysis, this is also their reputation as well. They're going to want the event to go well, and it's going to have to be a partnership. This will not be an easy thing to put together. So I'm not suggesting you assume that we won't have to abide by the terms of the agreement, but by definition, we're going to have to work closely to get it done.
I don't really have any questions to add. I just think this is something that would be a great thing for the city, and I think we should move forward with it.
Let me just add one thing, is that we have a placeholder for tomorrow, so we can move forward. From the committee, I'd like to recommend that we approve this motion and also the recommendations of the CLA's report to move forward to council. And I would just like to, I've given Jerry, your office, a list of my questions that at some point in time we'll get answers for those. But the one thing, in addition to your recommendation number one, I would just like to add for the committee report that we direct the CLA, with the assistance of the CAO and the city attorney, to negotiate a complete and binding application for the 2018 and 2022 FIFA World Cup. This application shall ensure that the city's general fund and liability interests are protected. So we just add that to your recommendation number one. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move that item with those amendments. Are we back? Mr. Weezer is not coming, so you can get back to
Item 3, yes.
3. Okay. All right. We have staff from CD 14.
Yes. Ramon Soto, CAO's office here again, and Eric Sanjurjo from CD14 is here, as well as Tom Brennan from the Police Department Facilities. And you had concerns or questions regarding what the nature of the artwork was that was offensive to certain individuals, and so.
Maybe you could start off by giving us an idea of how the process started, who had the input, and then where it went sideways as relates to the artwork not being used.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. I'm Tom Brennan, Facilities Management, LAPD. The process for all of the Prop Q stations, these were all the stations that were funded through the Prop Q bond that was passed in 2002. The Department of Cultural Affairs assembled a committee for each one of the projects. There was representation not only from the police department, which had one member at the table, also from engineering, as well as representatives from various art-based groups. We had representatives from UCLA, USC. Actually, I can't tell you who was actually on that particular committee, but for the police administration building, it was the same process. We took a group that evaluated submissions that came from a variety of artists. From those submissions, an artist was chosen to participate in the program. They then submitted a piece of art or a concept that was approved and was moved forward.
Approved by whom?
The
concept.
The concept was approved by the committee and then eventually by the Cultural Affairs Commission.
It was the department, and you said the department's a part of the committee?
I'm sorry, sir?
You said the police department is part of the committee?
There were one vote on the committee. Yes, sir.
Who are the other members of the committee?
I'm sorry, I'm having a difficult time with my hearing aids in this room when I turn them up. Sorry.
Just who the other members of the committee were.
The Cultural Affairs puts together the committee, so they're the ones that gather the art experts that become part of that program. In this particular situation, the artist submitted a concept. That concept was also shown to the neighborhood council, as well as some other community groups within the Hollenbeck area. They had some concerns about it at the time. They asked Cultural Affairs to talk to the artist about making some changes on it. When the piece came back, the final rendering of what the piece was going to be, there were changes that had been done to the piece from what had initially been approved. And the example that most set off the police department was in the initial rendering, in the background. This was a 100-foot long mural made out of tile, and it was based on a concept from a mural that is in Mexico City called Sunday Afternoon on the Alameda. That was then transformed into basically what the artist's concept of a Sunday afternoon in Boyle Heights was. For the police department, what had been police officers walking in the background, just walking, turned into making an arrest. Trucks driving on the freeway, overpasses were spewing smog where they had just been driving before. And really the community took exception to basically the depiction of the Hispanic community in the neighborhood. The community meetings that I attended, I will tell you, more than one person stood up and said that this mural depicted every negative stereotype about the Hispanic community that there was.
Well, how did it get to that point when the rendering, when the sketching didn't show that, and then the next phase we have this?
I would have to defer to Cultural Affairs on that.
Is Cultural
because
Affairs here?
The Cultural Affairs there, San Juan, is in Mexico right now in Guadalajara, as is the councilman for a big conference that they're holding. So almost the entire staff is down there right now. So that's why they can't be here
The
today.
entire Cultural Affairs staff?
Yeah, they're sponsoring a large book fair. Los Angeles is the host city, so it's a big deal. So the almost entire staff's down there. But I think essentially what he was saying is accurate. There was, I think, also gangbangers and illegal street vendors and people of ill repute.
I'm just trying to figure out who authorized to spend $176,000 on something that looks like nobody likes it. That transition phase is what I'm concerned. Where's Cultural Affairs? Do you know anything what they would say about that?
I did, talking to Ramon's colleague, Jackie Wagner, the CIO, who works with cultural affairs, so they have changed their policy somewhat. She's here, actually, she can speak for herself. Maybe she can speak that issue more effectively.
After the fiasco that this became, we had a meeting with Cultural Affairs about how we move through the approval process of art, specifically for the police department. That when an artist is selected, that we will see what the rendering is, and it will come to the police department, and the chief will look at it before a commitment is made that it's going to move forward. And if it isn't what the initial rendering is going to be, we're not going to accept it.
Well, one would think that would be part of the process to begin with. I mean, for God's sake, you don't spend good money on something you don't even know what you're doing.
I don't disagree with you, sir.
So is there any recourse in the sense of the city getting its money back, or is that beyond,
Well,
being that you got a draft of something and then a final product that doesn't match the draft?
Jackie Wagner, CAO, Analyst for Cultural Affairs. There are actually 10 representatives from Cultural Affairs traveling to Guadalajara right now, which represents our top-level staff. They're accompanying the mayor as well as 3 other council members. And this is for the Guadalajara Book Fair, La Feria. The City of Los Angeles is the host city for this event, and as such, Cultural Affairs received the grant to sponsor the event or facilitate the event. With respect to this contract, it is my understanding that while negotiations were underway with the police commission, with the police department as well as the community group, that the contract actually expired. And so our city attorney for Cultural Affairs is actually in the process right now of negotiating on behalf of the department with the artists for ownership of the artwork. The total budget for the artwork is based on the Percent for the Arts program, and so when the selection committee reviewed the applications and went through the process of selecting an artist, it was already based on a preset amount, based on the construction value of the project. So that it was 175 or 25 is totally dependent on the total construction cost of the project.
And we paid that already?
Yes, we have.
You know, let's do this. We have a meeting on next Monday.
Yes.
Why don't we continue this the next Monday? We have Cultural Affairs here, and all of the...
Cultural Affairs is expected to return from the fair. The fair ends on December 5th. I expect them to be back around the 7th or 8th. So you may want to continue it beyond the 7th or 8th.
Meeting on the 7th.
Miss, do we have any issues on delaying this report? Is this something that is critical?
We would recommend, I think, that you move all elements except for this particular one. There's several millions of dollars in transactions here that need to take place.
All right. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What is the timeline on that? Is that a placeholder already for this report? But we need to move it.
We would request that we move it. I think the recommendation we have is basically to reimburse Prop Q, which we have to do no matter what.
Yeah.
So
It's a matter of where it comes
you can request a report back from our office with Cultural Affairs and PD on sort of what the next steps would be on reimbursement or whether action could be taken, but we'd request that you approve the report.
Okay. Let me ask you, if we don't have a date in the council, what would we be looking at before recess?
Oh, yeah, most certainly.
Would we have the ability to have this information that you're talking about at council?
I don't know, could we get something back by next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow? 'Cause I think we'd like to have the report get to council by next week.
Right. We can probably discuss with some people in the Cultural Affairs Department, but I'm sure their management wouldn't be able to weigh on it before then. So some of the operating personnel.
And what's our last
Lower
day, the
level.
15th at council?
We actually have another construction projects report that hasn't gotten scheduled before any committees that also needs to be expedited. But we don't have anything controversial in that one.
Yeah, that's what you say each time.
You know,
Okay.
sir, I'm sorry, I was just going to mention that while they're not physically able to be here, I can still attempt to get in touch with a general manager and assistant general manager to find out the exact status of.
All right, if we, Ray, you saying it'd be better for us to move everything and ask for a report back?
Yes, please.
The other thing, let me just bring up one other item on the CD14 City Hall. One of the things, and I think this was brought up during the budget, where the intent was to stop, a recommendation was to stop the project at the time of the seismic, which we were spending about $13 million. And now this report is adding $4 million more to the project. It takes it to 17, and we're still $2 million short. And I would just like to make a request on this item that we ask the CAO and the CLA to work with CD14 and other members of the city family to create whatever value engineering that would keep it at the $17.9 million mark, and that we not be asked to put another $2 million into it for tenant improvements. So if there's some way that we could work the tenant improvements within the $4 million that is being allocated today, because that would then put another $2 million of MICLA fund. So that would be the request on that project, that we'd ask that we do it within the 17.9 and the $4 million that we're allocating today. Okay. All right. So we move the report with those two recommendations and a report back on the artwork for Hollenbeck and with the amendment added as the CD14 tenant improvements. Okay.
Thank you.
So that moves that item. Any other?
I think that's it.
That closes the agenda, and so our next meeting is December 7th. Okay, thank you.
Good. It's pretty bizarre, huh?
Yeah, I think it was.